Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Frank Demore with the Last Chronicles of Planet Earth. If you'd like to read my Bible prophecy documentary, you can get it for free. You can download it today with no strings attached. Just go to www.bibleprophecyman.com, and right below the cover, front to back cover, there's a link. Click the link and it will download. Right now I'm going to give you some information that one of the reasons why I've been watching what's taking place in Russia and Syria and Libya is because these nations are listed in prophecies that haven't been fulfilled yet, and they are the prophecies that need to be fulfilled, that we see in the news, that are showing us that these prophecies will be fulfilled in the very near future. Now, if you go to my book in chapter 11, you're going to see, let me bring this up here, you'll see a map. You'll see a map here. This is a map of the Middle East. And this shows the direction of all of the nations that God showed Ezekiel that were going to attack against Israel in the last days. Now, one thing that a lot of people are emailing me, and they want to know the difference between the Psalm 83 war and the Ezekiel war. Well, first of all, the Psalm war, the nations that border Israel are going to attack Israel. Now, this includes Syria. Now, the Ezekiel war, however, the nations that are listed in the Psalms do not attack in the Ezekiel war. So we know right there that there's separate wars, two different entities coming together, united consortiums of countries coming together to attack Israel. Now, why is it so important about Syria and Russia and all these other ones that I've been watching for? Well, when you go to my website, you're going to see some interesting information. I've talked about this before, but as the news comes on, I relay it. Let me just show you what's happening here. And I'm going to quote. It says, I followed the Palestinian visit to Moscow. The Palestinians this past week went over to Moscow to talk about what was happening with the peace process, the failing peace process, the everything that we've been hearing about this week. The speech about Benjamin Netanyahu and the borders, the speech with President Barack Obama and how he wanted to give the PLO their own state inside of Israel with those 1967 borders. This is what the article's talking about. So let me read it. It says, I followed the Palestinian visit to Moscow closely, and I saw both the host and the guests were eager to create an impression that significant headway was made. So one of the Russian organizers of these meetings said in turn for amnesty that Russia is seizing the incentive in the Middle East peace process from other mediators. In other words, they're trying to get involved heavier, more than the other members of the quartet, which would be the European Union, the United States, and obviously Russia was involved in that, and China. So they're trying to usurp some of this position here. That's what the meeting was all about. Says this is wishful thinking. Russia is not seizing anything from anyone. The Palestinians were also quick with the compliments. One of them joked, and appropriate slogan for these talks should be "Workers of the world pray," an allusion to the fact that for the first time in decades, all Palestinian leaders, both from religious and left-wing socialist movements, traveled to Russia together. So first, he added that for all their differences, everyone's agreed. Now you're talking about the Russian officials. Listen to the statements. And the Palestinians and all these different sects of the Fatah and the Hezbollah that were all went over there. It said, everyone's agreed on Jerusalem as the capital of the future Palestinian state. East Jerusalem, to be precise. Now, East Jerusalem, again, is where the third holiest site for the Islamic nations at the Dome of the Rock. Israel owns this, all right? This is why they want it back. And this is, they're come to agreement now. Russia and the Palestinians have come to agreement that they're going to take East Jerusalem. That's the agreement. And we know when you start talking about that, the curse of the Lord from Genesis 12:3 falls on those nations who try to divide Israel. So you got to watch what's going to happen to Russia now. And Syria. Obviously, Syria is, they hate Israel. And look what's happening to Syria. They're fighting against themselves to fulfill kingdom against kingdom prophecy from Matthew 24:7. It goes on to say this: the situation in the region leaves much to be desired. Results will be hard to come by, but it is significant that Russia has started paying more attention in the Middle East after a period of keeping the region and its politicals at arm's length, or politics at arm's length. It is important that such undertaking yield results. Of course, Russia needs to create a permanent mechanism aimed at bolstering its presence in the region. So Russia now is trying to move in and they want to show their force in the Middle East. There's a reason for that. If we're moving closer and closer to the revelation, to the beginning, then we need to see these two wars be fulfilled first. So we see the positioning of this huge prophecy puzzle coming together, where Russia is united with Syria, and you're going to see why here in a second, and is uniting with the Palestinians going against Israel. Now, when the Palestinians in all the Arab nations attack Israel and fulfill that Psalm 83 war, Russia is allied with most of those nations, and there will be retaliation at a later date that will fulfill the Ezekiel 38 war. Now, Russia, why won't Russia not sanction Syria? Well, Syria is one of their best allies, Russia's best allies. And there's an article that came out today that like I said, I've been watching Russia, I've been watching Libya, and watching Syria, because Libya is mentioned in the Ezekiel attack, Syria is mentioned in the Psalms attack, and Russia is mentioned in the Ezekiel attack. So listen to this. Russia will not back UN sanction resolutions on Syria. I mean, if you know prophecy, you know this is obvious. Russia TASS agency quotes Dmitry Medvedev of Russia as saying in a news conference. Medvedev said that Russia was unhappy with the way that the West has used the UN resolution on Libya. Libya is their friend. Now, when you go into the 11th chapter of my book, you'll find out that the Russians went into Libya, they paid off their debt, and they moved part of their massive Russian fleet into Libya. So you have the vessels, the Navy, in Libyan ports. And does it surprise you that Russia did the same thing? The Russians moved part of their military fleet in the port in Syria. They're there now. So it just shows you the alignment that's taking shape. Now, when Israel fights the Psalms war and they fight against Syria, Syria is to the north, right? Well, the prophet Isaiah in 17:1 and Jeremiah chapter 49 tells us that Syria is going to be wiped out. Damascus is going to be left in ruinous heap. So we know this conglomerate that's coming together. It shouldn't surprise anybody that Russia is not going to put sanctions on Libya and sanctions on Syria. They're their friends. They have their military presence right there in both of those countries. So when Russia sees that Israel goes up and wipes out Syria, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to say, look what they did to our allies. This is going to cause great animosity between the Russians and Israel, so much so that they'll unite a force, the Islamic forces, and take the nations that do not border Israel, those nations that are now mentioned in the Ezekiel war, of which we see Turkey, we see Iran, we see Libya, we see Ethiopia, and a lot of the other nations that God had showed us. And so we know that things are developing, and we see, like I said, this Middle East peace puzzle coming together. And this is why the Russians are pushing for this influence. It goes on, it says, the states must be given a chance to develop on their own. President Assad declared about the reforms. They must be effective. A change must be given to implement them, the Russian president said. So he's right there with Assad. And it isn't a surprise for people who know God's word. It isn't a surprise at all. We know what kind of alignments are going to come together, and they are coming together. Now, one of the other things that we should be looking for is because that these nations want to curse. I mean, they, obviously they're cursing Israel when they say we're going to overtake East Jerusalem and give it back to the Palestinians, divide up your land. The curse falls on all of these people. So last year, when there was some talk, when the Russians started to talk about this peace process in the summertime, and they said that they were going to back the Palestinians and they wanted to divide Israel into two. Look what happened. There was massive fires throughout Russia. They had some of the worst heat waves, intense heat waves that ran across Russia. It almost wiped out their complete wheat crop. It got so hot that it melted the streets there. And now that they're starting to say again that we wanted to, give the Palestinians East Jerusalem, watch what's going to happen to Russia, because anybody who comes against the tiny nation of Israel, which is God's chosen nation, to show the world that he is control, he is God, and he can take this little tiny nation and save this nation from all of these massive powers that are around it that are trying to destroy it. Only God can save this tiny little nation. And you will see that in the news shortly when you see the first war, the Psalm 83 war, take place. And keep in mind what I told you. Syria will be in that war, right? The ally of Russia will be that. And the only reason why I'm telling you that is because God showed it to us in Psalm 83.